going on, guys? This is Rob, and normally on Wednesdays we cover the ending of the What If episodes and explain it and make it make sense. But given the fact that the Spider-Man trailer recently came out, I don't think anybody would fault me for bypassing issue number 3, or really episode number 3, which doesn't really need much explanation anyway, and going into Spider-Man. So in this video, we're going to be answering the question, who's controlling Doctor Strange, right? Because that's one of the things that a lot of people are asking, and you guys have made some really, really good points. Looking at the trailer, one of the things that you notice about the mannerisms and the overall attitude and behavior of Stephen Strange is that it's very different from what we're used to. Stephen Strange is very much an overly serious character, right? A guy who just takes himself super seriously. And the fact that he's kind of joking around, that he tells Wong, of course I'm not gonna cast a spell, then winks at Peter Parker, it seems very uncharacteristic for Doctor Strange. Now, there's a couple possibilities here. The first one is that Marvel is making an adjustment to his character in the same way they adjusted Thor. That Thor was very much a serious character until you go into Ragnarok, and then he's more of a comedic character. It could just be that kind of character evolution. I'm more of the opinion that it really is Stephen Strange, but let's say that it's the second option here. That is the option that a lot of you guys are going with, which is that someone is controlling Stephen Strange. Then the question has to be asked here, who's doing it? Who's controlling Stephen Strange? And more so than that, why? Okay, let's go with our first real option here. I mean, there's a lot of possibilities here, right? Professor X of the X-Men is controlling Stephen Strange. You guys jest, but during Jonathan Hickman's New Avengers run, the Illuminati story, you actually find out that when Reed Richards gets the Infinity Gauntlet, right? Like Mr. Fantastic of the Fantastic Four, when he gets the Infinity Gauntlet, he doesn't want to put it down. Like the Watcher shows up and he's like, Reed, like disperse the Infinity Stones. None of you should be in possession of the Gauntlet. And he's so intoxicated with power, he doesn't want to put it down. And Professor X of the X-Men manipulates his mind and gets him to put it down. Like literally, Professor X overrode the power of the Mind Stone, right? So you guys jest about the idea that like Professor X could be controlling Doctor Strange, but he could. Obviously, that's not a legitimate option here, but it'd be amazing if it was. So here's the real first person that I'm picking to be the one who's controlling Stephen Strange, and that is Nightmare. Now, Nightmare, I think, will be a pretty popular choice among fans of the MCU. And here's the reason why. People want to see him. That's really it. People want to see Nightmare. And the reality is, this is potentially something Nightmare would do. The biggest problem with this is that the way events are unfolding in Spider-Man 2, it doesn't look like something Nightmare would do if he was in possession of Doctor Strange. So for those of you guys who are unfamiliar with this, Nightmare is what we call a fear lord. He's basically one of these guys who exists in what's called the Splinter Realms. You guys know that in the Marvel Cinematic Universe, you have the realm of Dormammu, right? Well, in the comics, it's very much the same way. The difference is that the Dark Dimension was at one point in time a giant landmass, right? So imagine that like all the continents on Earth were at one point a giant chunk of land, which technically they were. It was called Pangea. That was the realm of Dormammu before he got there. Now, after he got there, he conquered the whole area, right? And then there was some kind of a conflict or war that took place. It's never really explained to us, but basically a huge portion, a pretty large portion of the Dark Dimension basically broke off into a series of smaller realms, which we call the Splinter Realms. And then you saw the rise of different beings, Nightmare, Mephisto, people like that, each of whom rule their own little section. In the same capacity that like if a person ruled the entire continent of Africa or Asia or North America or something like that. That's kind of how the Splinter Realms work, right? So Nightmare is a person who hails, or a being who hails from one of those realms. The big difference here is that Nightmare feeds on the nightmares of people. It's how he sustains himself. Now, the more people there are sleeping, the more nightmare energy he can feed on, the more powerful he becomes. More recently in Marvel Comics, he actually gained so much power by feeding on the nightmares of everybody who was asleep across the entire world that he actually ended up defeating all of the different cosmic entities, including the Living Tribunal. And that's where a lot of people are getting the credence for the idea that Nightmare is the one who's controlling Doctor Strange, because in that comic, he captured Doctor Strange and then used Doctor Strange to put the world to sleep and then fed on all their energy for the purpose of conquering seemingly all of creation. It's a legitimate possibility. The difference here is that if it really was Nightmare, you likely wouldn't see things unfolding in the way that you're seeing them unfold in Spider-Man 3. What you would be seeing is him basically trying to put the world to sleep, starting with Peter Parker, presumably anybody else. You wouldn't really see him casting a spell that would allow for some adjustment essentially to the timeline that would result in basically a breaking of the universe in relation to the multiverse and just entering a state of freefall. You wouldn't really see that, right? It wouldn't really be something that Nightmare would do. Potentially, it's something that our next choice would do, which is Mephisto. Now, why are we choosing Mephisto here? Honestly, because everybody wants to see Mephisto, right? The devil's in the details, right? Everybody's like, Mephisto's confirmed, right? We still haven't seen him yet. Here's the biggest issue with that. Mephisto doesn't really function in that capacity. What Mephisto usually does is make bargains. He makes deals with people and then takes their souls when the deals are done, and then also tricks them along the way. Here's a really good example of that. So there was a story that was written recently called Thanos Wins, which is basically a story where Thanos seemingly conquers the universe without using the Infinity Gauntlet. One of the first things he did is he showed up on Earth and destroyed the Avengers. During that time, the Punisher was so pissed off about what happened, he basically said he would do anything to be able to destroy Thanos. And so Mephisto appeared and gave the Punisher the power of the Ghost Rider. Here's the caveat. Because the Punisher had the power of the Ghost Rider, he had the power to kill Thanos. The issue is, Thanos has long since left Earth, and Ghost Rider can't leave the Earth because he doesn't have the power to fly into space. So it was basically Mephisto giving the Punisher what he wants, just not the means to achieve it. That's kind of how Mephisto works. Now, ultimately, Frank Castle ended up siding with Galactus, he became his new herald, and then ended up becoming an ally of Thanos later on. But the important thing is that's usually how Mephisto works. What would likely happen here if that were the case is if Mephisto somehow made a bargain with Doctor Strange, which I have a hard time seeing how that would be a possibility, largely because there's not really anything that Doctor Strange wants so incredibly badly that he's willing to make a bargain with the devil to do it. And even if he was, he'd have to be aware of what it means to make a deal with Mephisto. Just because of the mystic nature of both of these guys, they'd have to be aware of the other. And so, assuming that's not really what's going on, and Doctor Strange did make a bargain with Mephisto, that Mephisto would likely do something like this, right? That it's entirely possible he would do it just to mess with things, right? Just to have a good time. But even then, it's still a little uncharacteristic for him. Usually when Mephisto makes a deal with somebody, his endeavors and his engagements are confined to that person. The only real major exception that you saw was during the original Infinity Gauntlet story, when Mephisto was trying to manipulate Thanos and then eventually get the gauntlet from him, and it was only for Mephisto trying to attain huge levels of power. And if that were the case, Mephisto wouldn't really have Doctor Strange, or wouldn't really use Doctor Strange to enter into the multiverse and cause all kinds of problems. Instead, he would likely just try to find a way to conquer all of creation. So in truth, it would behoove Mephisto to go after Wanda more than it would be to go after Doctor Strange, but nonetheless, it is a possibility here. Now, the next choice that I'm picking is one that I think is actually really cool and would feed directly into Doctor Strange 2, right? This guy is Shugorath. Now, Shugorath and Doctor Strange have a long history throughout the entirety of Marvel, and we know that Shugorath is going to appear in Doctor Strange 2. The indication here is that Shugorath is going to be chasing after America Chavez because Shugorath is likely trying to leave whatever universe he happens to be in, or that he's currently occupying, assuming they go with that, instead of him being a multiversal character, and then use America Chavez's abilities to jump between realities as a means to expand into the multiverse. But say, for example, that was the backup plan, that the initial plan of Shugorath, once he became aware of the fact that the multiverse had returned, maybe he popped up when the multiverse returned, whatever the case is, he's looking to basically expand into the rest of the universes and conquer the entirety of the multiverse, which has really been the motivation of his character all this time. And he comes across Stephen Strange, and he realizes the level of power that Stephen Strange has, and then says, well, I'll just conquer Stephen Strange, right? I'll take over this guy and then go forward accordingly. And then in turn, when Peter Parker shows up and says, I need you to cast a spell that can basically remove everybody's knowledge of my existence, then it's, aha, perfect reason to basically find a way into the multiverse, right? To screw things up intentionally. So everything going wrong with regards to the spell and all that kind of stuff is not necessarily because of Peter Parker. Maybe it partially is, but it's really more Shugorath trying to find a way into the multiverse. Again, there's not a lot to go on there, right? And even in reality, that theory doesn't really make a whole lot of sense when you think about the nature of Shugorath. It'd be a far more intelligent endeavor, and it would be really much simpler if Shugorath took over the body of Doctor Strange and then worked his way outward and basically started subjugating all the different superheroes that existed on Earth, and then worked his way out from Earth into the rest of the universe, and then basically conquered the universe, and then went out into the multiverse. Now, it's entirely possible he's already done that in other universes, and this is much like it is in the comics, where Earth, the main Marvel Cinematic Universe, is just the next place that he's trying to conquer, and Stephen Strange is his way in there. But again, it still begs the question, question, why would he go through all this effort? Why would everything happen in Spider-Man 2 unless it wasn't supposed to happen? Unless Peter Parker really did screw up and now everything's kind of going awry. But it is a possibility. Honestly, I think it's a pretty flimsy one. I think the best candidate for the person that is controlling Stephen Strange, controlling the mannerisms of Stephen Strange, is Wanda. I think Wanda's the best person to do that. And here's the reason why. We know just by virtue of the deleted post-credit scene for WandaVision, supposedly that little bit of a shadow that you see kind of on the mountains was supposedly Stephen Strange traveling to Wanda. Now that has been analyzed and in some ways discredited. People saying it's just kind of a leftover fragment from the original footage when it was modified and so on and so forth. But we do know that Doctor Strange was supposed to show up in WandaVision. We know that right now Agatha Harkness is just out there in New Jersey or upstate New York, wherever that little town was, and she's just kind of trapped there, living out the life that Wanda created for her. So we know Wanda does have the power to subjugate other beings of magical power that are very powerful in and of themselves. We also know from the end of WandaVision, the power of Wanda exceeds that of Stephen Strange. Now the question has to be asked, if that's the case, why would she subjugate Stephen Strange? To make sure he doesn't work against her, right? It'd be the easiest and most simple plot, that if Wanda was really messing with the Darkhold and that Stephen Strange went to visit her and said, look, you can't be doing this, or when she heard the cries of her kids, that she took off and instead went to the Sanctum Sanctorum and told Stephen Strange, hey, here's what's going on. A couple things to remember here. One, Stephen Strange is a Sorcerer Supreme. I have a very hard time believing he didn't know anything about what was going on and the great big huge fight and everything going on with Wanda, altering reality and all that stuff with Agatha Harkness. I have a hard time believing he didn't know. And it would make perfect sense that either he traveled to her or she traveled to him, but basically there was a kind of discussion to be had there. And that when the idea was, from at least from Wanda's perspective, I gotta go find my kids, that the answer of Stephen Strange was, he can't. Right? Like, I know it sucks, but you can't. You can't go meddling in the multiverse like that. You can't start screwing things up. You're gonna cause problems. And then if Wanda's like, well, no, I'm going to anyway, and Stephen Strange moves to stand against her, suddenly it's boom, domination. And basically Wanda takes over Stephen Strange, just to ensure that while she's gone doing her thing, Stephen Strange isn't going to act against her. It would explain why his mannerisms are different here, because if you look at the mannerisms of Stephen Strange in the Spider-Man trailer, he reminds me of Wanda, right? The winks and the little bit of a kind of a goofy, jokey nature to a degree, when she's happy, right? When she's happy, when she's chill, not when she's like losing her shit, right? Not anything like that, when she's like pissed off and angry, or in like Age of Ultron, nothing along those lines, but when it's just Wanda being Wanda, excited about what's to come, right? It very much reminds me of her. And so it would make the most sense that if a singular person were controlling Doctor Strange, that it's Wanda who's doing it, basically making sure that he will never be able to do anything that will work against her while she's gone, so he somehow chases after her into the multiverse and everything pops off. Having said that, I'm still not a huge fan of the idea that anybody's controlling Doctor Strange. I think it really is just Doctor Strange by himself. I think it's just him. He's in full control of his faculties, and basically he was casting a spell, Peter Parker wouldn't shut the hell up, and everything went sideways. I think that's basically what happened, you know, in Spider-Man 3 with regards to that whole segment and the multiverse and all that kind of stuff. But let me know what you guys think down in the comment section. I'm really excited to hear what kind of theories you guys have. And yeah, I will catch you all later. Peace.